connections being. One of them is working. I love it when this happens. Sorry. Hold on. Keep hitting the wrong one. All right. Is he ready now? Sorry, guys. It's just being fun. It's supposed to be connecting, and it's just not doing it. All right. Well, I'm going to hit connecting. Perfect. Now Facebook's on board. Now it says we can hit go live. Good job, Facebook. All right. I think YouTube is still going. Yes. Perfect. Okay. All right, you guys. We are live. Thank you for yet another interview this month. Kind of back to back. I know we just did, but summer schedules are what they are, so we are just doing what we can to get people on and let you guys share your stories. Just so that you know, we do have coming up in July for the Looking for a Cure events. Those are going to be taking place in Seattle first with Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and Dr. Stacy, who's also helping to host the that's coming up, and that is July 8th. If you want to register, you can head to lookingforacure.org, and we would love, love, love for you to make a team, come and walk with us, or walk virtually, and then just start raising money. Help us raise money and get to, I think our goal is about $20,000 at every one of the races, and if we can hit that races, that would be incredible for research in your local area as well as general research that we can do for ocular melanoma. So the next one coming up is in Palo Alto, which is in is benefiting. Half the proceeds will go to Byers Eye Institute. So just keep that in mind. Get registered. Walk with us virtually if you can, and make sure to on social media and in the newsletter. Okay, now that I'm going to introduce our panel today. So we've got 4 patients who are joining us. And they are going to be just sharing their experiences and their stories with ocular melanoma. And then we're also going to just briefly have a conversation about medical care for the queer community and how these guys have seen that evolve over time. So we're grateful to have all 4 of you here with us, and thank you anyone who's joining in live and supporting them. And I guess we'll just take it from there. So I've got Stephen Russell, and he's actually from the Jersey area, and Alec McKenzie, and he is from San Francisco Bay, of San Francisco Bay Area. And then William Karp is from Hollywood, Florida, and Calissa is from Memphis, Tennessee. And Calissa, how do you say your last name? Is it Neep?
Hang on.
Oh, is it Nipe?
It's Knipe.
Knipe. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys, all of you, for joining us. For Stephen over there on the other side of the coast, and same with you, William.
Not at all.
All right. Well, I'm just going to have a chat about your diagnosis, just kind of what this has been like for you over the course of time. So, Stephen, can you tell us where you or when you were diagnosed, and just kind of briefly tell us, maybe in 2 minutes or less, like your diagnosis story?
It was in March of 2008. I had tried to poke my eye out with a pair of sunglasses back in 2007, and I thought it was because of that I was seeing this flash of light in my eye, and that went on for several months. I was at a routine optometrist visit, and I told her about the flashes. She looked in my eye again and sent me on to a retina specialist the next day. And then a couple days after that, I was at Wills Eye Hospital, and they said, come in on Thursday, you're having radiation. Was diagnosed with melanoma. And then the biopsy came back, and it was, at that time, we only had monosomy and disomy. The 2 options, mine was monosomy, which is the worst, the most deadly, and almost always metastasizes. but my tumor was remarkably small, and it is now over 15 years later, and I am here and no metastasis. Um, and I was treated at Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, which fortunately for me is only an hour and 15 minutes away. While I was there, I met people who flew in from Ireland and California, and it's like, oh, gee, I drove here. So that's my story.
No, that's who are wanting to hear a little bit more in detail about Steven's story. He does share that on the podcast in a previous interview. I think it's like somewhere in the first 10 or 15 interviews. He's gracious enough to come back on and just be a part of this conversation. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to run back through Alec. Oh, Kalissa's back. Yay. I'm glad it worked. Oh, she disappeared. Alec, what about you? Tell us your diagnosis story, just briefly, 2 minutes or less.
So I was diagnosed just over 4 years ago. My husband and I had taken a vacation away to a little cabin out in the redwoods for the weekend, and it was pouring rain, and I spent all weekend reading. I read over 1,000 pages, and I woke up the last morning we were there, and I only had half vision in one of my eyes. And I figured I had no flashing lights, no symptoms at all. I thought I had pink eye, or I had strained my eye from reading too much. Went in to get dropped for pink eye, and the doctor was like, "This is not pink eye," and she referred me to a retina. And they did a couple scans and sent me right to an ocular oncologist the next day. I got in the next morning, and it turned out I had a very large tumor in my right eye that had been detaching my retina, and that's why I was losing my sight. The tumor was too large to do radiation with, so I had my eye enucleated, or removed, for those people that don't know that term, about 2 weeks after my diagnosis. And now I have a prosthetic eye, which is amazing. It looks just exactly, it's incredible what they can do with them these days. And so I have been going around with monocular vision now for about 4.5 years-ish.
Goodness.
Oh, and my doctors are all at Stanford University, Stanford Hospital. I see Dr. Mruthyunjaya at the Byers Eye Institute, which you just referenced. The fun run's going to be there in a few weeks. My family and I will all be there. And he is an amazing doctor. And just like Steven, I meet people there who come from all over just to see him. So I feel really lucky to be in a place with such a great doctor.
It's always great, right? The both of you are kind of on either side of the coastlines, and you have phenomenal doctors that are highly sought after, which is great. William, I'm going to go ahead and have you go next. So tell us, I've actually never heard much of your story, so I'm excited to hear more about this.
Well, I was actually originally diagnosed on February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2015, was when I got my pre-diagnosis, actually. I'd been, for some time, noticing that the vision in my left eye was kind of cloudy. And I just figured, it was of an age that I figured I had a cataract and wasn't really worried about it and didn't really think anything about it, and just kind of went about my business because using both eyes was fine. And my husband actually, finally kind of cajoled me into going to see the eye doctor to see what's going on. And I figured he would tell me I have a cataract. And he told me I had what looked like a melanoma in my eye. The eye doctor actually had seen that before. And I had 6 years previous been diagnosed with cutaneous melanoma. So I get all kinds of, body checks. They check every part of my body except my eyeballs. And that's the place where then I got another one unrelated. But anyway, so he referred me to Timothy Murray, who started the Baskin Palmer ocular melanoma clinic, and had started out his own program at Murray Ocular Oncology. And I was able to see him within several days. I think it was the following Tuesday. And they were able to confirm the diagnosis. It was a choroidal melanoma, medium-sized. Everything about it was the middle. It was resting on my optic nerve, and within 2 weeks, I was, and got plaque radiation. They did do the Castle testing, and I was a 1B. And since then, I go every 6 weeks for Avastin injections, which has been preserving my vision. So even though the tumor was on my optic nerve, I still have very good functional vision in that eye, as well as obviously the other eye. And like Stephen and Alec, people, I meet these people every 6 weeks. I've got some people who are on the same pattern as I'm at, as I'm on, and they come from all over the world to see Dr. Murray. So we're all so lucky that we have had the ability to get to world-class ocular oncologists. And when I'm there, I see people from, Nebraska and Taiwan and just like all over the world, and just think, boy, I'm 25 miles away. This is just amazing. I'm so fortunate.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing. And I feel like there's the more that I learn about the ocular oncology field, like there's a very small number of oncologists, but they're all so good. And we're all, I think in the States, we obviously have the most ocular oncologists in the world. I think it's like 50 or less total across the entire country. So how fortunate. Calissa, what about you? I know you've kind of got a few pieces to your diagnosis story, but let's just focus on initial diagnosis for.
So yes, my name is Calissa, and in 2010, so it was 13 years ago, I lived in North Carolina at the time, and I was having some funny floaters and some funny flashers. They looked like little white bullseyes and crescent moons going in my left-handed side of vision. But I just kind of thought, well, I have an appointment in June. I'll just wait. That was probably spring of 2010. I was 31 years old. And then in May, I started noticing this sensation of a shadow over my left eye. And I kept putting my hand up there and I could see it. So I was very confused. And then in June, I went for my normal eye appointment. And he said, he did a peripheral vision test, and all that vision up there, like up here, was gone. And he said, so let's do some pictures. And the optometrist told me, you have a retinal detachment. Obviously, he wasn't going to give me the bad news. So he sent me to a retinal specialist. It sounds like that's really common. So we went to the retinal specialist, or I did that day. I called my significant other at the time, who is an ex now, but we met at the retinal specialist, and he's the one that did the ultrasound and told me that, yes, you do have retinal detachment, but the reason you have it is because there's a tumor in your eyeball. And of course, tumor never entered my mind. So I remember calling my mom from the chair. I'm originally from Texas, so my parents were in Texas and I was in North Carolina, and had to call my parents and tell them I had a tumor in my eye. He told me not to go home and Google anything. Of course, I went home and Googled everything and freaked out, but just tried to take, let's see what this is. I think I had my ocular oncology appointment 2 weeks later, and I saw Dr. Marithian Jaya back when he was at Duke University. Yeah, he's amazing. I miss him. So I saw him, and we did the plaque radiation for 5 days, and the tumor in my eye has been dead ever since, dead as a doornail. So I'm super thankful for his expertise. And then in 2000, so 3 years later, I moved to Memphis, and he was super grateful because he knew the doctor in Memphis I guess they had done schooling together. So he was really thankful I was moving to Memphis. And now I see Dr. Matt Wilson, and he's been, keeping me good for 10 years now. And I see him annually. I did do Avastin injections for a while, and then they had me stop, and I have since lost vision in my left eye, but, I've gotten used to it. So it's not too big a deal, but that's my initial diagnosis story.
So I feel like it sounds like I think if just the part where people say like, well, then they told me I had a retina tear, and then they sent me to a retina specialist, and then the retina specialist was like, you have a tumor, and I was like, that was not on my mind. I felt just capture that part of the audio from everybody's interview, it would all be the same. Like that's like almost identical patterns of just that's how it goes. It just makes me feel like, okay, so then we need to be really focusing on educating our ophthalmologists, and they are the ones who are finding this most of the time and referring. So anyway, that's a whole other story, whole other conversation. But well, I want to talk a little bit let's talk about like just some of the struggles and some of the things that have been positives for you that have come as a result of this diagnosis. Positives, it's not like okay, like, yes, I'm so grateful this happened to me. Like, no, it's more like what are the gifts despite all of the struggles and the obstacles? When we can find those gifts, like that's part of what makes us able to get up in the morning as patients. So Stephen, what do you feel like have been a couple, and what do you feel like have been some of the gifts?
Struggles. I'm a Midwestern wasp, kind of shy, not shy, but we don't talk. My family doesn't talk about personal things. So the struggle was when this happened, I really needed to talk. And it was difficult to find someone to talk to. My husband was kind of, oh no, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. I needed to talk to someone about the fear. It was frightening. And this was before I even went on Google and found out what was really happening. Um, and I think the first person I talked to, a couple friend of ours were visiting from the West Coast. One of the couple, they were Jim and Jim, like Bill and Bill. One of the Jims had just gone through prostate cancer, and we were driving to dinner. I was in the back seat with him, and he turned to me and he said, "This sucks." And it was the first time I could talk to someone, and he wanted to hear what I had to say. Um, you find out, I don't want to say you find out who your friends are, but even many of my close friends were like, "Oh no, 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 don't." As soon as I wanted to talk about, "Oh no, 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 you're fine, you're fine, you're fine." So yeah, that was a struggle, finding someone to talk about it, that wanted to hear it. And then I got into the Facebook groups and the Cure Insight, and I went to the ocular. That's where met William. I met you in Cleveland at the um, Ocular Melanoma Foundation, the patient
Probably a patient meeting
gathering.
from them. Yeah.
Yeah. The retreat or whatever it was. It's like 10 years ago, right? And then meeting other eye cancer people. And I had only been in the doctor's office, and most of my medical professionals, I had to explain what I had to them. My primary care physician didn't know what it was. And it was nice to meet people who knew more about this than I knew. Medical professionals, other doctors than my ocular oncologist. That was nice. But so that I guess that's a positive and a negative.
No, for sure.
Um,
I can kind of see how you, for sure.
well, and that yeah, I'll consider that the negative,
Yeah, we'll
that
consider that the
struggle. But
struggle.
then, and I guess I mean I'm a musician. There's a lot of ego that comes with performing, and I guess I was really worried about my career and how I felt about what other people thought about me. And this happens, and it's like, ah, you know, things change. Um, since 2008, in 2010, I became a yoga teacher. I don't know if I would have done that before. I worried so much less about my career trajectory and just started doing things that I wanted to do. Became a yoga teacher. In 2015, I became a licensed massage therapist. And in 2017, I retired from full-time music work in the church. I was spending a lot of time in church, and more than most people do. Being a musician, I'm there all the time. And became a freelance musician, licensed massage therapist, yoga teacher. And I don't care what other people think about my career.
You
So
stop caring.
that's
You get
a
a
big
cancer
positive.
diagnosis, and then there's,
You
hey, I'm going to do what I want.
Right. It's not that I don't care. I just do what I want, not what I
Well,
think
you
other
care
people
about
want
what
me
you
to do.
care about.
Yeah, these are things I care about. Yeah, and
Yeah.
not worried about what I need to do, what other people think I need to do. So
No, I love that. I think
that's a big one.
that's powerful for sure. Alec, what about you? Struggles, gifts.
So I would say, I mean, beyond just the struggle of knowing you have a cancer diagnosis and it's, malignant and all the yucky that goes along with all of that. Um, Part of my struggles is explaining this to everybody. People think they know about melanoma already. And so they're like, oh, my cousin had melanoma and they just cut it out and she's fine for 20, people who ask like, are you in remission? And trying to get the word out to people like, you're never really in remission. You could have stray cells in your body at any point, and a long time after your surgery, they can come back and and haunt you. It's hard to explain that to people. People want clear cut black and white answers about medical things, and they want to kind of put you in a category of you're this type of cancer patient or you're that type. And ocular melanoma is really different from a lot of the other cancers that most people know about already. And so it's a struggle to have to explain that all, to decide, like, I'm not in the mood to educate everyone today. So yeah, you're right. And we just move on to something else. The other struggle is having this diagnosis just always hanging over me. You know, I'm a pretty positive person, but you know, every once in a while throughout it, I'll go through a whole day without thinking about it. And then it just hits me of like, you know, at any point I could get some bad news. And being part of all these Facebook groups that we're on, it feels like, especially recently, we're getting a lot of bad news from other OM patients who are getting bad news themselves or passing away. And it's this constant, like, what if, you know, I'm going to wake up and make today the best day I can, but what if? And then the last struggle for me was, I have kids. You know, when I was diagnosed, my kids were, I think, 7 and 13-ish, somewhere around there. And I like, wait, that's not part of the plan. I'm supposed to be there to see them graduate and to start their lives and to grow into healthy, responsible adults. And I might not be there for that. Wait a minute, you know, so that's been a struggle as well. And I have in my head this mental list of milestones I want to try and make it to. And every time I hit one of those milestones, then that becomes one of my celebrations. So, and then in terms of celebrations or gifts, as you were calling them, this diagnosis gave me a kick in the butt about my own lifestyle and my lack of taking care of myself and prioritizing my own health, my own mental health, my own physical health over everybody else. So it gave me the opportunity to kind of throw out a lot of habits that I had before, and I changed up my eating. I became vegan. I got back into exercising more. I started a cooking channel called the One-Eyed Cooking Guy, and I make a mess in the kitchen and post it all over the internet. And I have a lot of fun with that, and I get a lot of positive feedback around that as well. And then the other gift is this community. I mean, these people that we're in this conversation with right now, I feel like I know all of you. I've met your spouses, I've met your kids, but I haven't, because like we're virtual, right? But I feel like we're friends and supporting each other already. So the other gift is a found community of people and support and people who get it, you know, when you're having a bad day or you have a question. So that would be my response.
Thank you. I feel like that's really powerful. All of those things that you talked about, they're all very unique. I feel like I've had someone cover it in that kind of a way before. So thank you. William, what about you? What do you feel like have been some of the, have you found as gifts?
Sure. Well, struggles, boy, you know, when I first got this diagnosis, as I mentioned earlier, I had 6 years previously gotten a diagnosis of cutaneous melanoma. So my initial thought was, not this again, you know, and just this, for a period of time, I had this just awful feeling that my body was betraying me, that no matter what I was doing, somehow my body was sabotaging the big effort here and trying to kill me. You know, I mean, I was doing all kinds of things that I thought were pretty healthy, you know, and it didn't matter, you know, because my body was totally had a mind of its own kind of thing, and it was going down a very different path than the rest of me. So that was tough. That didn't last real long, but I definitely had that sense for a while. And unlike the cutaneous melanoma diagnosis, this seemed so much scarier. They got the cutaneous melanoma early. You know, I had my surgery, I had my, you know, my biopsies, and they took lymph nodes, and everything was at that point looked pretty promising and good. And I kind of just sort of put it away and got my, you know, quarterly body checks, and just, you know, other than that, and, you know, there was always a bunch of biopsies and stuff, but nothing deadly. So I kind of like put it aside until this. And then, so there was this big, for me, a real sense of isolation, you know, I mean, and for me, it was, I mean, I had people I could talk to. I have my husband, who has been amazing throughout all of this, and, you know, and family and friends and stuff. But I did feel like there was, this is such I felt like this was really a unique situation. having a tumor in your eyeball, and all things that go along with it. And so I felt very isolated, and it really, meeting then, finding the online groups and meeting people initially, was just a lifesaver for me. It was like a big, just it. I just felt I came out of a drowning into, and to be able to breathe and just appreciated so much the stories of the many people who I've become very good friends with, had connections with, and so that's been just an amazing lifeline for me, especially in the beginning. This has been going on now, as I said, since 2015. So it's not quite as acute anymore. I don't really think about it that much. I don't really worry. I don't get anxiety that people talk about. When I get my scans, just get them, and I don't worry about it. And the other thing that was really a challenge was, I was advised, like all of us, to find a general oncologist. And so I found a general oncologist and I went to see her. And in my first meeting with her, she had never heard of ocular melanoma. And she was so good for her that she was upfront about it. And she said, well, we'll learn about this together. And initially I thought that was cute, but then I started to think, I really want an ocular oncologist. I mean, I want a general oncologist who knows more than me. So I stopped seeing her and through my ocular oncologist found a general oncologist who has quite a bit of experience at any rate. So it's just sort of all that isolation. But a really positive thing sort of happened, and happened kind of organically, in that I wasn't really aware it was happening, is just that sense of absolute appreciation of every day. That I wake up and I'm so happy to wake up, and breathing. I just think about how delicious air tastes, when you really breathe. And I just have this weird appreciation for every moment I get, and so far the news has been great. I don't have anything to worry about, but I know this, as Alex said, this could change any day for any of us. And so if that happens, I'll deal with it. But for now, I just have such an appreciation. Things don't bother me that used to bother me. People don't bother me that may have bothered me before. I'm retired now, but when I was still working, there was always, all the drama that goes on in any group of people that work together. And I always kind of sat back and thought, well, that's kind of amusing. And I just have I just enjoy life so much now. So I really, and I owe that to my tumor.
I think that's so powerful. I love what you said about just that appreciation of the everyday. And I feel like if we could just summarize so far what you each have said as so generally diving into your passions and the community, and just learning to appreciate every day and just that kind of being present. Calissa, over to you. So what do you feel like have been some of the struggles? And you can feel free to allude to anything else that's happened, because I know that you've had more happen since your initial diagnosis.
Yeah.
And gifts that you feel like you can find.
For me, the struggle at the very beginning, I remember being very confused emotionally, because he told me, we're going to radiate your eye. We're going to put this plaque in. You're going to be in the hospital for 5 days. We're going to take it out. Hopefully it'll die and you're done. That's it. And usually cancer treatment is way more involved than that. And so it was really confusing emotionally. Like, I had cancer, but it kind of felt like I didn't, because all of a sudden it was dead. And I was like, so am I home free now? I mean, I know I'm not. I know there's a chance it could spread. But I just remember it being weird emotionally for me and for my family and for friends. They were like, well, what now? You don't have to get chemo. You don't have to be sick and lose your hair and all that. So that was interesting to explain to people. And it's even now interesting to talk to people. My sister-in-law has a friend who may have it, ironically. And I just spoke to her the other day and I said, it's very weird at first, because you're going to either get radiation or enucleation and then you're done. And you just get scans, and that's it. And you have to learn to live with this thing in the background that's kind of just sitting there all the time.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. As time passed, I did join. I remember back in 2010, it was like a listserv back then. It wasn't a Facebook group, and I joined it, and it was metastatic people and everybody, and I couldn't handle it. So I got off of it maybe about 6 months later, and I just lived my life. I actually had, I remember I was a nurse, a NICU nurse, and I had a nurse anesthesia interview 2 weeks after my plaque was taken out. And I was like, do I do this if I may not live that long? Do I go ahead and go to anesthesia school? And I was like, you know what? The cancer kind of made me think, yes, try to not live in fear. Live like you're going to live a long time. Live like the anesthesia degree is going to be worth it. So 2 weeks after plaque removal, I went to my interview, ended up becoming a nurse anesthetist, and I've been one for 10 years. Unfortunately, I am now recently on disability, but I'm thankful for that 10 years, and it has gotten me in a much more solid place financially, which is a blessing for my wife. So that was at the beginning. 10 years passed. I really didn't think it was ever going to spread. We did not biopsy my initial tumor at that time. It was kind of unsure if it was safe or not. And Dr. M said, let's not. So I never knew what my chance of metastasis was. And then in 2020, I had my routine abdominal CT. We did abdominal, my oncologist did CTs of my abdomen, and he saw something in my T10 vertebrae, which, coincidentally, what are the chances of it picking up my T10 vertebrae? And he said it looked really weird. We ended up proceeding to a biopsy, and it was metastasis, which just totally threw me for a loop. That was in 2020, so I'm 3 years out. What the metastasis has done for me, the struggles are just, I think, what anybody would expect. Thinking about dying, knowing that this cancer, barring a miracle or a cure, will take me at some point. This anxiety is much more prominent now because every scan, something else pops up. So that's been much harder. I had really gotten to a good place of 10 years. And so now there's no denial. But the gifts, I would say, are more. I am so thankful for everybody, for everything, for every day, for my wife. I'm thankful for my family, for my friends. The gratitude has changed tremendously for me since the metastasis. The other thing for me, I've always had a very strong faith, never have wavered in that really. And thankfully, the spread has made that even stronger. I know that, I just look forward to heaven, and for me, that's huge. So that has also grown stronger, where some people it can grow weaker. And I'm super, super thankful that it has grown stronger, and it's also grown stronger for my wife, which is something that I've hoped and prayed for. But I would say now the hardest thing is that I look healthy. I have tumors in a lot of places, and liver, lungs, pancreas, breast, all kinds of places. And I look great. And so people don't see that I get out of breath really easily. They don't see that I'm tired all the time. They don't see the nausea from the clinical trial, things like that. And so it's hard for people to understand what's really happening in my world, and why did she go out on disability 6 months ago, when up till 6 months ago, I was working. So that's been probably the hardest part, is people saying you're going to get better. Oh, you'll beat this. You'll beat this. You'll beat this. I almost just want them to be like realistic. So that's been I would rather people just be realistic and revel in the moment with me that I'm good right now. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And I think that's a struggle too, like with whether it's initial diagnosis or metastatic. It's maybe more widespread. Literally more widespread in your body when it's metastatic. But when you're expectations of cancer, right? The expectation of the cancer diagnosis is white hair, or you lose your hair, or whatever the media has put out there to sensationalize cancer. Not what we look like. All of us have maybe vision issues to some degree, but again, that's something we see. That's not something most other people notice, and that's something it's, again, not something other people notice unless like you sideswipe them with the car, like, oops. um, disclaimer, don't drive next to me. But I think that that invisible illness, that can be a really, really difficult thing for us to like cope with. And I side to that is having people like you guys to talk to about it. Because for people who have the same kind of invisible illness, get it.
Yeah.
Powerful in support systems. So let's just talk a little bit about like just learning to advocate for yourself. Are there things that you do now that you feel like are you would kind of tell your past self, or like if you could go back and tell your initial diagnosed self, like, do this, don't do this. Think about, like, I guess who's newly diagnosed, if it were kind of based on your own experience of what you wish had happened, or what might have been better, what would be helpful for advocating, things like that. I guess we'll go back to the beginning. Stephen, you're up.
What would I tell someone? Wow. There's so it's so cloudy. I don't. There are parts that I don't remember, and I don't remember how I felt. So it's like a fog. It's like I always describe it as coming out of the subway in New York City, and you start walking on the street, and then you're going the wrong way. You don't know which way you're going. So you have no one to rely on other than the medical professionals and yourself, and who else will uh, help you. But ask for help. I didn't. I guess I didn't know how to ask. So it was good to find groups of people who were asking for help and had told me, yeah, there are people here in this group that can help you. Uh, and another thing is I tell my doctors everything, everything. I mean, why wouldn't I? And I think when I first started, I was afraid to, especially when the doctors didn't know much about this. To say, well, all right, then I will find out things, or I will go to another doctor. And I went through several doctors, just that either didn't know how to treat me or wouldn't. This is go back to Will's, go back to your ocular oncologist. No, they treated my eye. They're not gonna treat
They
the
don't
rest
treat
of
the
me.
rest of my body if there's something that happens.
Right.
Yeah.
I had at least two primary care physicians say, no, I don't treat this. You have to go back to Carol Shields. And no, Carol Shields doesn't want to talk to me about my liver. She treated my eye, and now all right. So you have to talk. You have to say, if you don't know something, I will find someone who does, or yeah.
Or
So
please find
guess
out.
or please find out, or I'll find out and tell you where to go to find the information. And it's nice being a member of a group where you can say, where can I find out information?
Mm-hmm.
Because someone in this group has been through this, and say, go here, go there. The other thing I would say to anyone, not just someone with eye cancer, is learn to say no. No, don't treat me that way. I only had one. It wasn't really a bad incident um, with Dr. Sato. Dr. Sato treats people with metastatic eye cancer. But his assistant came in and interviewed me, took all these notes, and then sent a letter to my primary care physician. And I saw that they sent the letter to me, and the letter was wrong. Half the information was wrong. It said I was single. My husband was in the room while she was interviewing me and wrote down I was single. So I went back to him like 6 months later, and I showed him the letter. I said, I don't want to do this to you, but you need to know. And he was horrified. But things are wrong. My age was wrong, and that hit. It's like, well, my husband
like
was
you
in
were
the
a
room,
different
and you wrote
person.
down I was single. Did you do it intentionally, or so and that was my only bad experience. I know people have had bad experiences in the medical field, but if that's the worst that I had, then I'm lucky. So, but yeah,
Oh,
to
for sure.
say no, this is wrong. No, you don't treat me that way. Or to say no,
Yeah,
no,
just to say no.
I'm too busy for that. No, sorry, can't do it.
Yeah. Well,
So
and to
that,
say
yeah.
no too, like I think that's kind of to segue to Alec. One of the things you had said was that, right, trying to explain to other doctors, trying to explain to other people um, about your diagnosis, and to recognize that it's okay as a new patient or a seasoned patient, whatever we want to call ourselves. It's okay to say no and say, I don't really want to talk about cancer today. Like, no thanks. Like, thanks for checking out my eye, because that seems to be the only thing you think is affected here. But
Right.
no, we're not going to talk about that today. It's my kid's birthday, or I just don't want to talk about it. Alec, what about you? What would you say are 2, 3 things you would tell someone brand new to this diagnosis, maybe that you wish you could have told yourself?
I think the first is a more, I think I'm closer to my diagnosis maybe than some of the other patients on this call right now. So I still remember every second, every detail of Dr. Muthrunjaya talking to me and my husband that day. And I think if I were like floating out of the body that day, looking down on the scene, I would remind myself that everybody's different in how they respond. And there's no like, I kind of felt like there was a way I was supposed to respond, like you see in the movies and on TV. And when I wasn't responding that way initially, I was like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not doing what everybody else does when they get these diagnoses? And then found myself reacting that way later on. And so I guess I would say I'm a teacher. I tell my students this, and I tell lots of people this in different situations, that there's no one right way to do anything, like there's no one right way to come out to your family and tell them you're gay. We all have different experiences with that and with coming out. There's no one. I have 2 adopted children. Both of their stories and journeys are very different from each other and from all the other adoptive families that I've talked to. We all came to adoption in different ways. So cancer is similar, and getting that diagnosis is similar. So I guess the first piece of advice would be to react the way you need to react for yourself, and to realize that changes. You might react one way one day, and that it's totally normal to wake up the next day and have a very different reaction where you fall apart and are much more emotional about things. And then the other thing piggybacks onto what Stephen was just talking about, and what you guys were just discussing, is to be an advocate for yourself. I was so naive about the medical system, about the insurance system, about how all of that worked. I used to see stories on TV about these poor people who were facing these horrible diagnoses, and all the horror stories of getting these bills and having to do battle with the insurance companies. And I was like, wow, we're so lucky we don't have to do that. And then wham, like now we do. And now they're not going to let me get a scan. They're denying my scan that my doctor says I need for my, to make sure I'm staying healthy. And so now I got to call the insurance company to appeal it. And I have to make sure they've called my doctor, because nobody makes sure that happens. Like there's just all this extra stuff. It's like a full-time job of advocating. And then once that system gets going, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, that part got better. There's less of that I have to do as I go through this. But I would say be ready to be an advocate, and to make sure, like I was just talking about this with my best friend today. We were talking about the medical system and texting back and forth about it, about how, everybody in medicine exists in their own little circuit, and that circuit works really well when you drop into it, but that circuit doesn't connect very well sometimes with all the other ones. And information gets lost and misinterpreted, or now all of a sudden you're single, like Stephen just said, or stuff like that gets through,
or your
that you don't
diagnosis
realize
doesn't count,
right?
And it's not valid in the, but why would it not be? It's an exception. It's
exactly
rare. Yeah, just some of those nuances, those funky little things, they get lost.
Yeah. And so I would recommend for somebody, once you've gone through the initial diagnosis, I'm not saying day one, obviously you have a lot to process when you've been given a diagnosis like this, but as things start to settle a little bit, and as you're moving through the process, just make sure you're an advocate for yourself. And along the same lines, I would say take notes. I have a great friend who came with me to many of my initial appointments when I knew I was going to be out of my head and my husband was going to be out of his head, and it was too upsetting. And she was able to write stuff down, and actually we still reference those notes 4 years later. There's times where she'll be like, no, I think the doctor said that, and she can go back and look, and it actually has that. I don't know if they'll let you record or whatever, but when you're in those appointments, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to keep it all straight. You get home and like, oh, I forgot what he said. that piece of advice too, to try and record as much as you can and keep good records and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and for yourself, but also as you referenced, like for the insurance side of things, if you
Yeah.
have really good notes about conversations with insurance and like you talked to this person and that person, and they told you, keeping that paper trail can be very important in just making sure that you're getting the care that you need and that you're getting the coverage that you really are entitled to with your insurance plan.
Right.
Stephen, you look like you had something to add. No? Okay. You just lean forward. It's fine. We just get to see your lovely face a little closer up. It's fine. All right, William, you are up. So, I guess, yeah, what would you tell your older self or just somebody new to this diagnosis?
Oh, I would say to my older self, slow down. I was in such, I got the diagnosis. I was in such a hurry to get this thing out of me, and so I just, I got referred to someone who I'm glad I got referred to, but it never occurred to me there might be other treatment options. I didn't know anything that proton beam is as a possibility. Obviously, nucleation. I mean, there are all kinds I mean, I just went whole hog, just get this thing out of me, as quickly as I possibly could. And I think that I may have not made any different choices, but I did feel like it happened so quickly and I allowed it to just slow down. It's not going to kill me to take a couple of days to look into options and to check things. It's a quick move. It's quick growing, but it's not that quick growing.
No,
So I would
that
tell
sense of
myself to slow
urgency
down.
can be very scary feeling
Yeah,
at first. So just trying
exactly.
to recognize, like you said, that you have time a
Yeah.
second opinion. You can ask for other treatment options if you're not comfortable with the one that's been offered. Very
Absolutely.
powerful.
And it wasn't even so much that I wasn't comfortable as that I just didn't know that there were other options. I just moved fast, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell myself to slow down. The other advice I have is, and I'm not saying this. All four of us clearly don't need this advice, but a lot of people. I went to a support group for a while, and through the local chapter of Gilda's Club. And I was really struck in this support group by how resentful so many of the people in my support group were towards the people in their life, towards their spouses, their caregivers, feeling like they weren't being treated like I don't know, maybe it was my own bias, but I felt like they wanted special treatment because they had cancer. And I felt like maybe it's just their opportunity to unload, but it just made me feel like we need to make sure that we're not the whole story, because we're not the whole story. Our husbands and wives are part of the story too. They're going through this exactly with us. And in some ways it's harder for them because we always know how we're doing. We always know how we're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of have to figure it out. And so to take care of your loved ones who are so much a part of this. And I did want to say one thing real quick, especially in terms of Alec, your point about taking notes. One really neat thing that happened is I did end up getting to get a consult and something called second generation tissue testing with Bertel D'Amato, who's like, the guru of ocular melanoma. He's actually back in Liverpool now, but for a while he was in the States. And he did this thing. He was the most amazing person. But one thing that he did was he recorded the entire consult so that I didn't have to take notes, and he did that. He didn't do that for me. He did it for everybody. And he just gave you the little CD of your visit. So you didn't have to worry about not remembering anything. And I was so moved by so many things that I experienced with Dr. D'Amato, but that in particular, that but we do have that option. We can certainly ask, our practitioners if they don't mind if we tape them. I never have felt the need to do that, but I was glad Dr. D'Amato did that for me. But that's kind of like the advice I would give.
That's nifty. I didn't know that he did that.
Yeah, he is remarkable. I mean, I consider myself so fortunate that I was able to have that testing with him.
For sure. Well, thank you, William. I love what you said. Give me just.
There you go.
7 o'clock here, so my children are not in
Yeah.
bed. They're not in bed, but that's okay. All right, so Calissa, I'm gonna go ahead and move over to you. Thank you, Bill.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm gonna Oh, I was gonna piggyback off what he said about recording. My metastasis happened in February of 2020, and as we all know, that's where the year COVID happened. So all of a sudden, my parents came to visit to support me during the metastatic diagnosis, and they were going to stay with me through the spine radiation. Well, they got stuck here for 10 weeks because of COVID. So they lived with me and my wife for 10 weeks unexpectedly. My mom has Alzheimer's and my dad is blind, believe it or not. So it was just nuts. Well, anyway, only one person could go to appointments. And, we're sitting here learning things. I started Opdivo and Yervoy after the radiation. So there was just so much information coming at me at these appointments, and I couldn't bring my dad with me. That's who I would have brought if not for Hillary. So we did start recording, and they knew that. So I just said, I can only bring one person, and my dad wants to know what's going on too. So, and none of the doctors ever minded me recording the conversations, especially because there was only one person allowed. Hopefully now that's different. Um, as far as what I would tell someone, it's really ironic that this is the question because, like I said, on Saturday, my sister-in-law found out that her childhood friend may have ocular melanoma, and she is seeing my eye doctor, Dr. Matt Wilson in Memphis tomorrow to find out and have all the testing done. And it was just so crazy. I was sitting on the beach in Destin, Florida, and she hands me the phone to talk to her. And what I found myself saying to her was to have hope. Because I said, you're talking to someone that's 13 years out. It's not a death sentence. It's not like you're going to die tomorrow. I said, and honestly, this is a good time in history to have this disease because so much research is happening and we are making strides. We now know how important the immune system is, as opposed to back in the day, they would put people on chemo, and they might die faster, where now we know that immunotherapy seems to be where we need to target put our focus. So I kind of encouraged her to see it as like, okay, this is not fun and it's not good, but at least it's happening now. And just trying to see the good side of things. The other advice I would give that I have to give myself every single day is to not feel guilty. It took a lot for me to go out on disability. And even now, I still struggle that I'm on disability. I feel like I should be at the bedside, putting people to sleep and doing my job that I love. But I know I couldn't get through a day. I couldn't physically do it, and I just have to accept that. And my wife, Hillary, she won't let me lift up anything. She's just super, super supportive, but I try to accept that and not feel guilty that she has to help me in those ways, and just accept that that's where I am right now. And that's why I'm blessed to have her. And, but I tell you what, the disability thing is tough. I do not like that I have to, that's where I am physically. And I struggle with guilt all the time. And even back in 2010, when I was diagnosed and I think I took like a week off work. I should have taken a little longer. I remember I went back to the NICU bedside with a patch on my eye and I just kept on working. But partly maybe that was good for my, mental status, but at the same time, it might have been good to take a little more time and process what was going on. But guilt is a big one. That's really hard for me. I think that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you. This has just been a really good conversation. So now let's kind of shift gears for maybe our last 10 minutes, if you guys are okay. And let's just talk a little about what, as members of the queer community, like as you come out, as you and your spouse have, been together for you observed in the medical system or experienced yourself. It could be the positives or the negatives. Stephen, what do you feel like you have to share there?
I don't really have any negative. I mean, I live in suburban New York City. I was treated in Philadelphia. I mean, I didn't have to explain who this man was to anyone. Um, I don't, I can't imagine what it would be like in a place less welcoming. But I mean, I didn't have to ask to have him in the room with me, but I would have. And anybody who came in, oh, it's my husband. We've been together 28 years. um, so
It gets hard to count after a certain point.
it could, but yeah, and I guess if if I weren't so positive about it, I would bring proof. I don't know, do people have to do that in other parts of the country? Say, here's my marriage certificate. This man needs to be in the room with me now. I would if I had to, but I've never had to prove who he was. But yeah, I mean, advocate for yourself. Just say, this is the person I choose to be in here. It doesn't matter whether you know what our relationship is.
Well, and
and
that
here he
doesn't
is.
affect your care either. It
Yeah,
does affect your care is not having your support person with you,
right.
for sure. Well, you had some stuff you wanted to share from kind of a little further back as opposed to now.
Yeah. Well, I share Stephen's sentiment that I feel like I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I feel like it's just a non-issue. You just bring into the room whomever you need to bring into the room, and nobody bats an eye, nobody asks or says no. That it didn't always used to be that way when many years ago, I don't remember, 25 years ago probably, my husband and I were sitting at home watching TV one night, and he had a stomach ache all day, and it just all of a sudden flared up to the point where he's like, I think something's really wrong. We need to go to the ER. Brought him in, and he ended up having a pretty bad appendicitis attack going on. They brought him to the back. You know, we were in the waiting room. They brought him back, and they would not let me back to see him 25 years ago at Stanford University Hospital because I was not family. We weren't legally married. We weren't, I had no legal standing to go in the back and see him. I couldn't see him that most of that night. I couldn't see him until they moved him to a hospital room after his surgery. When he had his appendix out. That was the first time I was allowed to see him at Stanford University Hospital in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. That was their policy. And so now, flash forward 25 years later, and I get this diagnosis at Stanford University Hospital. And it's like I just said, it's a non-issue. Nobody, they greet my husband with the same warmth and professionalism that they do everybody else. And I feel so lucky. I will say that it's been eye-opening for me to be part of these Facebook groups, and that there are people who definitely come from other backgrounds who the LGBTQ community is something they're not used to, or a lifestyle or a way of believing that sees it as a negative. And that's been kind of eye-opening to me, that people in our own community can sometimes have some negative things to say, some anti-LGBTQ things to say. And so in that way, I feel like there's still some growing to do, and there's still some, but I think that's more of a societal issue. That's not OM specific, obviously. But it does filter down even into the OM community a little bit. But overall, I'd say my experiences are amazing, and Dr. Muthrunjaya has just been wonderful. My my general oncologist has been wonderful. We've had nothing but respectful interactions with everybody, so we're very lucky.
Well, thank you for sharing and sharing us with the experiences on both ends of the spectrum. I feel like that's just very powerful. And I guess just to echo what you have said, like I can see that as well. Like just as far as the patterns of, I don't think that, well, it just isn't. The OM community is a small community of people, but we are not exempt from prejudices and, different types of belief systems that allow space for groups of people or don't. And I think that it, like you said, I think, to just come into a group that is not as accepting of you as you feel like you've had for your whole life, or for the majority of where you're at. So thank you for sharing. William, what about you?
Well, first of all, I do want to say, Alec, I am just stunned that even 25 years ago you had that experience. That just blows me away a little bit. At any rate, so I'm glad that's changed at Stanford. But my experience has been amazing. I mean, I go to, like I said, I get these Avastin injections every 6 weeks. So I feel like I kind of live in my ocular oncologist's office, and they have been amazing to my husband, and he comes in the treatment room with me, when I get the shots, and usually, after the nurses prep me and then all the stuff that getting ready for it, when Dr. Murray comes in to give me the actual injection, my husband is usually rubbing my leg, and doctor, and then it's just like a non-issue, and nobody thinks anything about it. And Dr. Murray, after he's done with the shot and takes the little speculum thing out of my eye, and he always says to Bill, well, he's yours now. And, and it says something, it just all feels very, very, very just normal. I've never in any medical setting, either with Dr. Murray or any of the other specialists I see, or even regular doctors, I've never had to actually come out to a doctor, other than, when they want your history, they sometimes ask you about your sexual orientation. So that may be there in all those documents that I don't know that they ever actually even read, but anytime that Bill is with me, nobody says, who's he, what's he doing here? They make assumptions. I mean, I guess it could be my brother. A lot of people think we look alike, so, but they just carry on, so that I don't even, it doesn't even occur to me. I have, it just seems so completely natural and normal. So, and that feels like what life has become, and I'm of an age where I remember when life was not like this for us. I'm not quite old enough to remember Stonewall, but I'm not that, just a little beyond that. So, so the freedoms that my husband and I have as a married couple astound me based on what my expectation was when I was young. Anyway, but in terms of
very good to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now I
too.
live in an area where well, before we moved here to South Florida, which obviously you expect some level of acceptance, and integration. We lived in a very, very rural area of Western Virginia, and we lived there, and people, they knew we were gay. They referred to us as the Bills in the same way they might have had the same last name. And I actually think that it bothered them more that we were Democrats than anything else. So, but anyway, that we've just had a blessed life in that I've not experienced homophobia. I mean, if people are feeling it, they're doing a really good job of keeping their mouth shut about it, which is all I really can ask.
Yeah, for sure. Melissa, what about you?
So when I was first diagnosed in 2010, I was with my ex, and we were not married. And I think the only appointments that she went with to me were the very first ones, and then didn't go to any more. So it just never was an issue. I never told anyone. I wasn't very out at the time. It wasn't something that I advertised at all. So we didn't have any problems. And I was 31. So when I had my plaque radiation surgery, it was more like my parents were there. So they were the ones that were kind of supporting me through that surgery. Now, fast forward to the metastasis, and thankfully I had met Hillary. We got married 6 months before the cancer spread. Great first year of marriage, let me tell you. But she has come with me, she's always come with me to my appointments ever since we were together. So for 6 years of our relationship, she has come with me to my appointments. And we've always been very honest. She's my wife. This is my wife, Hillary. And I think for anybody that's listening to this, that's LGBTQA, just be honest and be upfront about it. It really does seem to be so much better these days. I've seen Dr. Mruthyunjaya and then Dr. Wilson in Memphis. He knows that Hillary's my wife. If she happens to not come to an eye appointment with me, he always asks how she's doing. I see Dr. Palera in Memphis. He knows that she's my wife. He's my medical oncologist. And then Dr. McCain is in Nashville for anyone who's going to go see her. She's amazing. None of the nurse practitioners there, anybody at the Sarah Cannon Research Institute, they've all been super welcoming. They love Hillary. They're just wonderful. Same goes for Philadelphia. A lot of people that listen to this may end up someday in Philadelphia with Dr. Sato's team. We see Dr. Cedar, and she's wonderful, loves Hillary. Dr. Eshelman loves Hillary. Everybody loves Hillary. So I'm super thankful, like, to be able to share her with everyone, and that she's my wife, and we come as a team, and we have had zero issues. Never, no one bats an eye. And I'm super thankful for that. I don't think thankfully didn't have to. I remember as a kid, in the 80s, like all of that, but I really haven't had to live it since I've been out myself. So I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, the medical community is wonderful with it these days, it seems. And I had a major spine surgery in February for metastasis, and everyone that took care of me, there was never a question. Hillary was who they called.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, and kind of to allude to a little bit of what you said towards the end there is that if you are someone in the LGBTQA who is experiencing poor medical care for whatever reason, you have the ability and the grounds to seek other care, and you should. I think that that's generally what we kind of all came to the conclusion before this call. It's just that, like, if you're not getting as good of care as you guys are able to have, that you are feeling supported, that you're treated humanely, that you're just treated like a person because you are, then you should seek care elsewhere. I know we've had just a handful of the ocular melanoma patients who have been at some stage in their journey. It's been really unfortunate to hear about those circumstances, but they also took their care elsewhere because that's the power of the medical system.
Plus, with HIPAA, they may not want to share information with people who are not on the form, not because they're gay, but because you didn't give permission. So if you do have a partner, you do have a spouse, put them on the form. You can share information, and then they will, right? It may not be a homophobia issue.
Well, and another issue to think about that I didn't think about until now is for maybe someone who hasn't come out to their general public and family yet, your medical records only for you and anyone you give permission to disclose them. And so that means your doctor their hands are tied. They can't tell anyone. It only does you good to tell who your partner is, who your spouse is, system is, and can keep that line of communication open with your doctor. They will not disclose anything that they're just not supposed to disclose anything about their patients. That's just part of being a doctor.
It's also illegal.
Well, yes, it's illegal. It's
legal
literally illegal. HIPAA comes in big time right there. Well, you guys, thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this call. Is there anything anyone feels like they want to add as we close out?
Well, I'd just like to add something. I would like to thank you, Danette. I think you've done a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And with a toddler in tow, you've done really great.
Oh, sorry, guys. I had to literally get out of my chair. It's like,
No,
children, stop knocking on the door.
and
I'll hassle with them.
I'd like to thank you too for having a Cure in Sight, acknowledging Pride Month, and for bringing on people from the queer community to have our voices magnified this month as well. It feels very welcoming, and like we all belong to a Cure in Sight. And so thank you to you and to the Cure in Sight community in total.
You know what? You can title this a Queer in Sight.
There we go.
Better than the title I came up with.
That's perfect.
Okay, I'm writing that down, William. You get to coin that phrase.
That's awesome.
Pride Month next year. William gets to be in charge of it all. That's perfect.
I know, right? No, seriously, you guys. It's been so good to talk with you all. Thank you for your time, and
thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.